Welcome back to The Explainer. So, today we're diving into something totally unorthodox. A text by an author named Xu titled 24 Mandatory Indices to Heaven. Now, usually when we talk about paradise, right, the conversation revolves around faith, theology, maybe some ancient philosophy. But this text, it literally claims to mathematically and scientifically prove that heaven exists. And not just that, it lays out an absolutely unbending, zero exceptions checklist of behavioral rules you have to pass to get in. It's a wild ride, so let's unpack exactly how this argument is built.
Right out of the gate, the author sets a very specific, kind of surprising tone with this quote. The universe is not only rational, but also mathematical. We aren't dealing with mystical visions or vague prophecies here. The text establishes a strictly empirical approach, basically arguing that anything that doesn't conform to scientific principles is just a fantasy. According to Xu, heaven isn't just a peaceful state of mind. If it exists, it has to be subject to logical deduction and mathematical reality, even if we can't physically see it with our own eyes quite yet.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to follow the text's natural progression. First, the mathematics of heaven. Second, heaven's earthly manifestation. Third, the 24 mandatory requirements. And finally, no shortcuts to paradise.
Starting off with Part 1, the mathematics of heaven, exploring the coordinates. To explain exactly where heaven is located, the text asks us to look at coordinate systems. Now, we're all pretty familiar with the standard plane rectangular coordinate system, right? The one with 4 quadrants. Imagine the positive quadrant is heaven and the negative is hell. Simple enough? But the text argues that human life actually exists in a much more complex framework. It introduces a complex rectangular coordinate system, basically a multi-dimensional space containing 20 distinct quadrants. The core claim here is that humanity currently only occupies and perceives just one of these 20 quadrants. So, heaven physically exists for sure, but it resides in one of the other 19 quadrants that we simply cannot see yet.
So, why can't we see these other 19 quadrants? Well, the text relies on this mathematical concept of an imaginary number axis. Picture a horizontal space-time axis that runs exactly perpendicular to our eyes, straight through the origin of the x and y axes. The author uses this brilliant, really vivid visual analogy here. Think of a chopstick. If you hold a chopstick perfectly perpendicular to your eye, just looking directly at the tip, what do you see? You just see a single dot, right? The entire length and reality of the chopstick is completely hidden from your perspective. And the text claims this is our exact relationship with the universe. We are looking down this imaginary axis, seeing only our single dot of reality, while the vast 20-quadrant complex reality, including heaven, extends invisibly straight out in front of us.
Which brings us to Part 2, heaven's earthly manifestation, the text's proof. Now, the author admits that just describing some invisible mathematical heaven wouldn't really be all that convincing. So what's the proof? While the author claims to have personally copied the 1,000-year world of heaven directly onto Earth. And to be clear, this isn't spoken of as a metaphor or like a new church building. The text presents this as a literal, physical replication, a real-world beta test of heaven's exact social and environmental conditions, built right here in the mortal world. And to back up that massive claim, the text points to empirical witnesses. It emphasizes that over 100 people have actually seen this earthly manifestation. Not just seen it, actually. They've lived in it and experienced it firsthand. By introducing these witnesses, the text is trying to pull heaven out of the realm of blind faith and into documented, observable fact. The logic is basically, if hundreds of people have personally experienced the prototype, you can no longer rationally deny that the final product exists.
Moving on to Part 3. The 24 mandatory requirements, the toll for entry.
All right, so since heaven is mathematically framed and practically tested on Earth, the million-dollar question is, how do you actually get in? Well, the text outlines 24 exact, completely inflexible behavioral indices. Think of it as a strict admissions checklist. This first set demands complete detachment from burdens. To qualify, you must achieve absolute freedom from debts, worldly ties, troubles, anxiety, grief, worries, and fears. And the standard here is unbelievably high. It's not about just managing your grief or getting therapy for your anxiety. The requirement is 0, total freedom from them. The text mandates this absolute shedding of every emotional and practical anchor that ties us to the stress of the mortal world. You literally have to arrive at the gates of this quadrant completely unburdened.
But it doesn't just ask you to empty yourself of negativity. You have to actively cultivate a very specific mindset. You need merits, the possession of absolutely nothing, a carefree, joyous mind, and zero pessimism. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you also need a fondness for playing. This mathematical heaven isn't some place for solemn, stiff meditation. It explicitly requires its inhabitants to be playful. It's a super dynamic view of paradise, where a fun, joyful spirit is literally a mandatory requirement to get past the bouncer.
Then we get to ego and social harmony. The author strictly dictates a total absence of ego. You can never compare yourself to others, never argue, never regard yourself as correct, and you have to distance yourself entirely from anger. But here's the real kicker. You can have no special relationship with anyone. You have to share everything with others, meaning the text enforces absolute radical equality. No favoring one person over another, no exclusive best friends, no special romantic bonds, none of that. The social architecture of this heaven relies on a perfectly flat, frictionless society where ego and exclusive attachments are just entirely wiped out.
Let's wrap this up with part 4. No shortcuts to paradise. The final verdict.
So what happens if you fail to meet even one of these 24 specific indices? Well, the text is completely uncompromising. If you are substandard, the system rejects you, period. Those who fail are recycled through samsara, which is the cycle of rebirth. And it's not a gentle process either. Depending on how far off the mark you are, you'll be recycled through the mortal world, the animal world, or even the livestock world. The text makes it very clear that this is an impartial, automated, universal system. It doesn't care about your good intentions. It only checks if you hit those exact 24 indices.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark line the author draws between this mathematical framework and traditional religion. The text explicitly states that pretty much all traditional religious practice, asceticism, meditating in temples, burning incense, memorizing sacred classics, is entirely useless here. Even a lifetime of preaching or doing charity won't guarantee you entry. The author literally writes, "Please accept my apology because you are not and will not be heaven-bound if you don't pass the indices. The only key to the lock is strict conformity to those 24 behavioral requirements. That's it."
Now, you might be wondering, why is the text so insanely unyielding on these rules? Well, it boils down to a harsh but logical formula for maintaining paradise. Step 1. Individuals rigidly meet the 24 indices, which ensures Step 2, heaven remains a perfectly ideal society where every single life can fully enjoy pleasure. The author argues that if even one unqualified person, say someone with a tiny bit of anger or a tendency to argue or even just an exclusive friendship, were allowed in, they would introduce friction, and that single point of friction would ruin it, guaranteeing that others could no longer enjoy the ultimate pleasure of life. It's a really fascinating take on community. True utopia, in this framework, absolutely requires the total suppression of individual quirks and exclusive bonds.
And that brings us to the text's striking ultimatum. Go there or do not. The decision is yours. It's such a fascinating, almost completely detached conclusion, isn't it? The text has laid out the geometry, given earthly proof, and defined the exact rules. There's no pleading with you, no proselytizing. The road is clear, the math is settled, and the burden of action is entirely on you. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to chew on. If paradise were truly just a mathematical equation, one that required you to permanently erase your ego, your attachments, and all your exclusive loves, would you actually want to solve it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.